In the previous lectures, we looked at code that was directly executed without producing any executable files. In this lecture, we're going to look at compiling and running Groovy using the Groovy C and Groovy command line tools. When we start writing programs, we're not going to have to do this manual compilation all the time, so please don't let this section scare you off. I just think it's really good to understand what is going on behind the scenes, and that what an IDE is doing is not really magic. There is some kind of logic to what's going on. So the first thing we're going to look at is Groovy C. And Groovy C is the Groovy Compiler command line tool. It allows you to compile Groovy sources into bytecode. It plays the same role as JavaC does in the Java world. So again, we've talked about this already, but when we write Groovy source files and then compile them, they're not getting compiled down to some Groovy code that then gets turned into Java code. This is actually getting turned into Java bytecode. So the easiest way to compile a script or a class is to run the Groovy C command on a particular Groovy file. Before we jump in there, I'm here in the Groovy website, and if we go into documentation, in the tools section, you're going to see a Groovy C, the Groovy Compiler. And there's a lot of information, probably more than what we're going to cover today, so I would definitely use this as like a reference section to look at what the Groovy Compiler can do. So here we are in a directory. I have some Groovy files here, and I have this person.groovy, so let's look at that. Really nothing more than just a class. Again, if you don't understand this syntax, don't worry just yet. We just have a normal class. And what I want to do is take that class and compile it down to bytecode. So to do so, I'm going to run the command groovy c and then the person.groovy. So now if I list the commands of this directory again, let's bump that up a little. You're going to see a person.groovy and a person.class. So now we have an actual class file. And if we were to look at that, yes, it is binary. You know, it's just binary code. This is byte code that we're looking at. Just a lot of mumbo jumbo that we don't really care about. So let's go ahead and clear this. We can also go ahead and remove star.class. If we have a directory full of Groovy files, like we do here, we can say groovy c star.groovy, and if we run a list again, you'll see that for every Groovy class in here, we called the Groovy Compiler, and it created a class file for each class. So that's an easy way to go ahead and compile each class from the command line. Okay, so in this example though, we basically just created all of the classes in the same directory. So what if we wanted to put those in a new directory? Well, if we were to look back at the documentation, we can see that we can actually put a flag on this. So /d is our flag. And we want this as for directory. What directory do we want to put those in? And then we could say star.groovy. So we want to basically compile all of the Groovy classes, and I want you to put them in a directory called classes. So now if we look, now we have a classes directory, and there are all of our classes. There are other command line switches, and I'll link to them in the additional resources, but like I said, back in that documentation, there's a list of all the options that we can run when we type groovy c. Okay, so I'm going to back out of here, and let's remove classes. Okay, so let's talk about Groovy now, being able to run these. We can use the Groovy command to execute Groovy scripts and programs. The file extension actually doesn't matter as far as the Groovy executable is concerned, but naming files with a .groovy extension is the convention. We can use the Groovy command and pass in the name of the file with or without the extension to run the program. Okay, so now what we want to do is go ahead and compile all of our Groovy files into classes and then run them using Groovy. So let's go ahead and look at application. And all this does is create a new instance of person and print out that object. And I believe that object has a toString on it, so it should print out the name. So the first thing we want to do is actually compile all of our Groovy classes in this directory. So now we have a bunch of class files, right? And we want to run that application file. So we can run it with Groovy or without Groovy. So now what that's going to do is, again, just create an instance in that particular application code. All we did was create an instance and print it out. So now you can see that running Groovy, we were able to run the actual application class. Again, when we compile Groovy program, it compiles down to Java bytecode. It's because of that, this running a compiled Groovy program is almost identical to running a compiled Java program. The only difference is we would have to add, we need to add the requirements of having the embeddable Groovy jar. So let's say that we wanted to run this particular class from Java. So we've created an application.class file, right? So if everything that I've said is correct, that it's just Java bytecode, then we should be able to run that from Java. So what I want to do now is say, all right, let's run this from Java. Now I just need to add something to the class path because we need the Groovy all distribution on there if we want to go ahead and run that. So just bear with me here as I find Groovy. This is my current installation. Embeddable, I want Groovy all 2.4.5. So that's a jar, and let's go ahead and run application. And there we go. So we just ran the compiled code from Groovy that got compiled down to Java bytecode from Java. So I hope that helps. Just a little bit of info on how to compile your Groovy classes and then how to run them in Groovy or in Java as we just saw here.